As people trickle in, I'll start off by saying hello, everybody. This is your host, per usual, Gerry Schweitzer. Would love to welcome you to our ongoing monthly discussion chat with Jason Cohen, who's the founder and CEO of Gastrograph AI. So as many of you know, Jason was the founder and executive director of the Tea Institute at Penn State. So by way of background information, at that point in time, Jason oversaw 20 plus researchers. He had 5 fields of study under his auspices in traditional Chinese, Japanese, Korean tea. His unique research in sensory science, machine learning and artificial intelligence, eventually all of this has led him to developing Gastrograph AI. Jason, beyond that, is a professional coffee, tea, and beer taster, which I think, as I've always said, it simply means he knows what the heck he's talking about. So today we're going to get into something that is on the mind of everyone lately. It's certainly on my mind. I've had random discussions around this topic over the past 2 or 3 weeks with various different people. But it really is around everybody who's connected in some shape or fashion with new product development and innovation. Our topic today is, in fact, that new product development and innovation, predicting food and beverage consumer preferences. So one other thing before we get going, which is, I think, something that many of you have asked us for. If you have any questions at any point in time, please be sure to write them in the chat, and we'll get to them. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear some of the questions, some of the statements you wish to make at different times during our discussion, and we'll field them as they pop up. Both Jason and I can see them, so no problem. So, hey, Jason.
Hey, Gerry.
It's always a pleasure to see you and have these discussions with you. I know that we've both been famous, or perhaps infamous, for letting our minds wander in these kinds of discussions and conversations, whether we have them online or offline. And I love them because they're, I love to pick your brain and see what's going on around the various topics that we naturally get into. This one is in particular need of debate and challenge throughout the industry, but particularly as it applies to Gastrograph, to you, and obviously to new approaches. I think it's really important. So, as I said, I'm sure everybody listening in has some take on this as well, and we would love to share that with you. So please don't hesitate to throw us some open questions and debate points. We'd love to field them. So let's get into it. One of the things that we've talked about, we've hinted at, we've perhaps gone at it obliquely, but now we need to hit it head on. Why is it so difficult? Why is it so hard to predict consumer tastes? I mean, when we're talking about prediction here, we're really getting into all sorts of areas that companies have traditionally used, right? Because they know the lifeblood of their growth. The lifeblood of their growth is new business. It's whether they buy it from garage guys that have, got a big canoe paddle and a vat and they've made something, or it's, people in Vermont that have made wonderful sauces over the years, or salad dressings. But they take into account all this data in some form or another. We've seen it: trend data, future trends, research, metadata that we see going on now. But new product introductions are still failing. I mean, it depends on who you read. The Deloitte recent research, some of the stuff from McKinsey, some of the stuff closer into the food and beverage industry, between 75 and 90% within the first few years fail. Let me repeat that. Everybody out there, between 75 and 90% of the things you work on or have worked on fail. Certainly within the first 4 years. There's breakdowns of this, these are general overview stats. So Jason, why is predicting consumer taste so hard? And what's your perception on what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, thank you, Gerry. That's a really helpful lead into this. So I think there are three things that all work in concert to make predictions in perception and preference difficult. The first is that consumer preference is constantly evolving. Anytime that you think that you've measured something, anytime that you think that you have been able to get a read on what's currently going on in the market, there's immediately going to start to change. There's going to be new introductions into the market. There's going to be new flavors. There's going to be new experiences. Individuals are going to gain those experiences at different rates, and they're going to go off and they're going to go try new things. And some of them they're going to like, and some of them they're not. And they're going to acquire new preferences. And those new preferences are going to lead to changes in their old preferences. So there's a constant evolution in what consumers are currently being exposed to. There's a constant evolution in what their preferences are. And that makes it very difficult to predict a moving target. The second part of it is that the industry generally, traditional methods broadly, are poorly utilized in matching perception and preference. So if you have two people, for example, you and I, Gerry, right? If we taste the same product, we might both dislike it, we might both like it, or we might like and dislike it, right? But we might, even if we both like it, it doesn't mean it's a good or bad product. We might both like it for different reasons. We might actually physiologically be responding to that flavor differently, perceiving different things, and liking it for different drivers of preferences based on our perceptions. And that makes it triply hard to model, right? It means that not only do you now have an unstable state, you have two individuals who might like the product, but they like it for different reasons, but you actually don't know, usually using traditional methods, what those reasons are, right? And so that means that it makes it nearly impossible to build a feature-based method, a feature-based model for what it is that people are going to like and dislike. And without those features, it makes it difficult to develop new things. It makes it difficult to optimize your existing things. And it makes it difficult to understand what it is that customers are responding to.
Right.
And so, finally, the last reason is because it's not a static market. You can develop something great. You can develop something that people like, but you're competing against every other product on the shelf, right? And so if anything out there is more preferred, if anything out there is more affordable and affordable or better branded and similarly preferred, right? It's going to be outcompeted. So these things, it's not a single round game, right?
Right. Yeah.
Customers are going to explore. They're going to try new things. And so, one of the things that we really care about here is in the idea of sustained preference. It's not just preference around novelty. It's not just preference around single trial. It's not just preference around, do they like it enough to nod and smile? But it's about, do they love this product? Do they like it enough to eat it again and again and again? Do they like it enough to maintain brand loyalty to it, where they're not going and trying every other, mango, whatever, or
sure, right,
product, right, that gets launched, right?
Yeah.
And so, that really ties in with that third reason, is that when we think about how to design and develop successful products, it's about creating sustained preference.
Right. As opposed to, consumer preference states that people look at and they say, okay, let's see what state of preference they're in versus this chocolate milk. And they do some kind of round robin closed session with a qual mediator, and they start seeing that people have all sorts of different takes on this chocolate milk or the product that they're tasting or whatever it may be, and so they make it's hard for them to say, okay, let's do it this way, and which is why I think this may be point 2 and point 3 of your expose, When you walk into, I walk into the Wegmans, up here in Ithaca. Everybody here is brilliant, right? It's the home of Cornell and Ithaca College. And you walk into Wegmans, which is a wonderful store, and I see 1,000 billion products, but when you look closely at them, they're just very derivative. Whether it's chips, chocolate bars, snacks, gluten-free, it doesn't matter. It's all the same, except for maybe little modalities of change, because I think people don't know where to go for the flavors. They don't know how to really understand what are the steady states of the consumer preference versus any of these products at any one given time. Which takes us to the next thought, which is something that you've just talked about. Why are these states in flux?
Yeah.
What is prompting everybody? You've touched on that, because there's a lot of things coming at people, and people are exposed to a lot of things, and it constantly modifies their preferences. But you mentioned the idea of sustainable preference, which I don't think most companies understand. I think they'd like to get there, don't get me wrong, but I think they're all about dipsticking. They're dipsticking in the market. They're dipsticking with the research they use. They're dipsticking with everything they have, qual and quant, and they're coming up with the flavor of the moment. Forget the month, the flavor of the moment. I mean, how do you predict sustainable preference?
Yeah. So first, to define sustained preference. So we think in terms of sustained or exploratory preference states. So there are macro level trends that truly matter, right? The shift in levels of bitterness, right? We went from drinking IPAs, eating dark chocolate, eating fruit flavored parfaits, right? Those products were starting in the 1990s. And those products were all more bitter than the previous generations of product before it. And so what it meant to be a balanced product, what it meant to be a high preference product changed. And at the same time as that, you had a declining preference state for sweetness. Overall levels of sweetnesses were declining. Consumers were demanding products with less sugar. They were preferring products with less sugar. They thought that bitterness was an indicator of quality, and it was truly a driver of preference. And so if you have increasing bitterness, decreasing sweetness, you need something new in the mix in order to balance it, right? And into the 2000s, what we had was an emergent to stable preference transition for sourness. Products became more sour than they had ever been before. We went from IPAs to sour beer, black coffee to lightly roasted black coffee, dark chocolate to Koro and carousel varieties, more fruity and citric chocolate. Even going from things like Greek yogurt to things like Icelandic yogurt and skyr, right? All of which are more bitter and sour than the previous generations of products. And so if you think about those transitions, what we have is we have exploratory preference state where consumers are going out and they're trying new things, they're acquiring new preferences. And those could be along a single axis, like sour acidity. It could be on multiple axes, like declining sweetness and increasing bitterness, or it could be a combination of sustained preference states and exploratory preference states across different areas. And so when we think about how do you develop a product, right? Particularly in a situation where you're in an exploratory preference state, just think about, kombucha, or just think about any of the more, the level of acidity in sour beer 2 years ago, 5 years ago versus today, right? Those things were changing. So it meant that it was much more difficult to create a product with sustained preference while preferences were shifting out from under it. While consumers were in an exploratory preference state, when they were going to go out, they were going to try new things, and they were going to vary the intensity of their preferences, right? What it means to be a modulated, a well-formulated product is going to shift out from under you.
Right.
And so, yeah, so as we're predicting for these types of things, why it's possible and how it's possible is consumers go out and explore. They try new things, which lead to acquisition of new preferences. The repeat exposure to those flavors yields perceptual differences due to adaptation, which causes them to re-enter an exploratory state. So, when we make predictions, what we're predicting for is what is the stable state, what is the current state, what is the stable state, and where does your product need to be in order to benefit from that. Interesting.
So that leads us to obviously the next slide, which I think is going to be really interesting for people to hear. To look at these consumer preference states, and how do we identify them through predictive sensory analysis? You ran a piece of research to some longitudinal degree, I would think, between 6 months prior to March 2020. So we're talking COVID.
Yep.
To 6 months after March 2020. And for those of you out there who are interested in this, you can scan the QR code that you see to read the full blog. We want to talk about this because this is a real, very important example of what we're talking about now, and certainly, you know, what Jason has just brought up in terms of exploratory preference states that we can actually identify and understand from a sensorial standpoint, the breadth, the length and breadth of this, the depth of this, and how it can affect their consumer choices, in-market choices. So this is an actual case study we want to bring to your attention regarding our collective taste preferences pre and during, as I said, after COVID. So let's go over this, Jason. What did you do here? Let's look at what you did. What were the results, and what do you think it sheds light on in terms of consumer preference states and prediction?
Well, so when COVID first hit, we saw that as the largest systemic shock to consumer behavior since rationing in World War II, right? The level of impact, consumers no longer being able to go to bars and restaurants, right? No longer able to go to concert venues or other arenas or sports venues. Consumers staying home, consumers cooking more, right? All of these things were a systemic shock to the flavors, aromas, and textures that they were surrounding themselves with, that they were generally consuming. And that doesn't even begin to consider, right, individuals who had an income decline or lack of availability of food because of the lockdowns and the quarantines. So we knew that that was going to have an effect on our data and an effect on our ability to make predictions going forward. So we immediately increased this longitudinal study that we had going for 6 months before and after COVID, demographically stratified 600 people. And we looked at changes in consumer behavior. What were they eating more of? What were they eating less of? We moved our standing panel from a CLT methodology into a iHut, with our panel managers going around and delivering products throughout the New York area. And so we were able to pair that data and we were able to actually look at what the systemic shock was doing. And particularly when we think about this in terms of stable or exploratory preference states, right? You had in 2019 into 2020, you had consumers in a hugely exploratory preference state in a lot of different areas. Particularly if you think about salty snacks and chips, the types of things that were coming out, a lot of the new novelties, a lot of the new +1 products. Those were, consumers were out, they were trying new things, all right? Companies were encouraging them to try new things by creating derivative products, right? Like a barbecue plus or a vinegar plus chip. On the other hand, to kind of show, what this was doing. So on the other hand, you had, as soon as consumers started to eat at home, right, one of the first things that happened was it acted as an accelerator for some trends, and it acted as a reversion to the prior stable preference state in other trends. So as an example of the former rather than later of it acting as an accelerator, we have overall, we could look at apple cider vinegar, which was near neutral pre-COVID, or malic acid, which was near negative pre-COVID. And we could look at that contemporary and post-COVID. And so we already knew that sour and acidity were increasing in overall preference. We knew that they were flavors that individuals were being more and more exposed to. But if you think about the sourdough trend and individuals starting to cook at home, starting to make more sourdough products, if you think about individuals cooking at home and beginning to use various types of vinegars that became increasingly popular throughout the pandemic, this actually acted as an accelerator throughout the pandemic. So this was an exploratory preference state that was accelerated. And we can also see the opposite. We can see a uh, um, this is a similar example for an additional acceleration, right? When you think about CSDs and high fructose corn syrup, sweetened carbonated soft drinks, and where people are tasting corn syrup and corn syrup related flavors, a lot of that comes from on-premise sales, right? You had individuals that consumed products in bars and restaurants and concert venues and stadiums. And when that closed, right, many individuals were not in the habit of bringing sodas or highly sweetened products home. And so their
Right.
overall level of exposure to sweetness greatly declined, right? In some cases, just totally declined, right? They didn't
Right.
have anything. And so we had already known that high fructose corn syrup and overall high intensities of sweetness were on continuing on a stable decline. This continued to act as an accelerator for that. So we had, two examples of where exploratory preference states were accelerated by the impact of COVID. We could look at other preference states that were a reversion to the mean, right? You had, I was using the chip example earlier. You had a lot of
Right.
individuals in an exploratory preference state for chips. A lot of them reverted back, right, to whatever their late teens, early adulthood, whatever they were eating then, whatever the product was, reverted straight back to that, right? So they stopped buying the super exploratory and the novel products, and they went back to things they considered to be comforting.
Right.
So that's the opposite example.
Right. Right. That's interesting. So basically what we're saying here is that this isn't your garden variety trend report or metadata collection. This is something that you've done directly. You went directly to consumers. You modified the things that you were doing because of COVID. You had to go to a hut model and get away from the panel model. And so you got direct evidence of what was going on, and you ran this through the AI. So
Yeah,
that
exactly.
the AI could understand pre and present what was going on and predict where it would eventually go to, which is interesting because I think a lot of people, we always have this debate. I'm sure everybody listening in has this debate when they do talk about AI. There may be as many definitions of this as people talking about it, but essentially AI is learning. It is to use the expression machine learning. It is learning. It is putting together the experiences and the consumer taste preferences that it has garnered through the data that it's being trained on and fed on, so that you can eventually understand the sensorial, predictive idea of where things may go. And so that's why we say this is not, or at least I'm saying, this is not your garden variety trend report. This is totally different, information. Explain, but I think this is an incredibly important point, not just for us at Gastrograph. Obviously it is, because we endeavor to talk about and use AI and develop and you for one, innovate around that. But for all other new methodologies that are talking around this stuff, I think it's important for people to understand that this is not, an old Rob report trend data piece. This is something new. This is not Yankelovich monitor. This is other stuff. Can you explain why trend data and metadata can only take you so far, and why AI, machine learning, the algorithms you've put together, something else is needed in order to accurately predict consumer preferences?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this webinar, where without actually having real consumers tasting real products, it's impossible to model what it is that they're perceiving and what it is that they like and dislike. Which means if you can't build a feature-based model, then you can't do predictions about the future. And so, what really separates our data is that we go around the world, have consumers taste products. both global products and products that are relevant to their local markets, right? We have them do a full sensory profile. What is it that they perceive in the product in front of them? And then how do they respond to that? And by using that to build up generalizable models, right, it's actually a forward-looking prediction for what it is that they're going to like and dislike and how their preferences are going to evolve into the future.
And you know, yeah, I'm reminded by, you know, as you said that, I'm thinking back and I'm reminded that, you know, you'd been the one that predicted the growth of kombucha before a lot of other people saw it coming back in the day when it was one flavor, it was weird in a squat bottle on a shelf, and it looked like some kind of, it looked like some kind of Eastern, you know, European, you know, product with a very simple name across the top. Now, of course, it's exploded as a segment. It's mainstream. People are drinking, you know, essentially fermented teas in flavors all over the place. So, okay, so then why is that significant? What should be done? What should people be doing regarding AI, regarding its use, regarding the capability of predictive sensory analysis? What should we be doing as an industry at this point?
A couple of things. We need to be thinking in terms of building up data sets that are actually usable to make predictions. A lot of the traditional methodologies are based around frequent statistical hypothesis testing. So you run an experiment via experimental design. So if you want to know if products are different, you run a difference test. If you want to know if they're similar, you run a similarity test. If you want to know if they're preferred, you run a preference test. And the problem with that is that creates snapshot data, right? That creates data that's only usable to analyze within the experimental design. It doesn't actually build up databases that you can use to make inferences about new products, new projects, new questions into the future. And so where I think both our technology and where I think a lot of the investment inside CPGs is going is into shifting the types of data that they're collecting and the methodologies of collecting that data into something that can be used for machine learning. I think that is the first step, because without high quality data, right, you'll never be able to make high quality predictions.
Right. That's right. That's really important. Instead of reusing the data as it is in the metadata, you know, using history to try to predict the future, it's a little bit difficult, not just in the food and beverage industry, I may say. What's really important, I want to get to a more provocative thought that I kind of always like get stuck on because I love the thought so much. It's that what you're talking about is the AI itself, you know, the capability, the technological capability of AI can be used in various ways that you just described. It can be used to create flavors. You can actually create and innovate new flavors, textures, combinations of those that humans can't get to. You know, you can't reach them from here, kind of a thought. Because, and I've heard you say this, and I want you to explain it to the audience. Humans, I can only create based upon what I have already been exposed to. In other words, my own personal taste experiences, food experiences, beverage experiences are the well from which I would draw from to create new. So they're limited to that in each of us.
Yes.
But AI has all of us in it, presumably 3 to 4 to 5 billion data points in it that it can use. So obviously it has a very deep and wide well from which it can pull. Is that a fair explanation of it?
It is, right? We cannot transcend our genetics. We can't transcend our experiences. So I can formulate products based on the things that I have tasted and the products that I've liked, right? But we're in a global community. We're in a global world. We work with product formulators here in the United States that are tasked with making products for 7 countries in Europe, or for formulators in Japan or China, tasked with making products for Southeast Asia, for Indonesia or Thailand, right? And they can't transcend their genetics and their experience and their background.
Right.
And so by using the AI, right, by allowing the AI the AI is an ever learning platform that's always up to date, right? That has access to the perceptions of over 1 billion consumer different demographic groups, right? Stratified by age, sex, race, socioeconomic status, past tasting and smoking habits. So by leveraging all of the demographics and all of the products and all of the perceptual experiences and all of the preferences that exist in the AI, it can come up with combinations of flavor and novel flavors and novel textures and novel experiences that work together, right, to create something better than a human formulator could come up with alone, right?
Right.
And obviously it's human in the loop, right? We're relying on real humans tasting real products. We work very closely with human formulators in order to achieve that target flavor profile, right?
Right.
But using the AI, we can target general populations and sub-demographics and specific demographics that would otherwise be unreachable or too expensive to target using traditional methods. And so we can develop better products for them faster, by leveraging all of the data that's already in the data set.
So you're very close to the AI, to the data sets, and what clients are looking at and using them for. So tell us, what are some examples of future consumer preference states that you see growing? What are the,
Yeah,
what are those areas you see really churning?
I think we're in the earliest days of an emergence and stable preference transition for earthy flavors. Earthy flavors are things like some certain mushrooms, turmeric, but an earthy expression, not a spicy expression. And we're seeing the aromas or flavors like petrichor. These types of earthier flavors, right, are a new balance where you have this increase in acidity, and now we're looking for new things to round it out to act as a backbone. We've already gone through various phases. There's already existing stable preference states for things like woodiness and roast, right? But earthiness is relatively new, and we're in the very early stages of that.
Yeah, I can see the mushroom thing. Absolutely. The very venerable farmers market in Ithaca. If you walk up and down it, and it's unbelievably pleasurable to look at what's going on and what's being grown by all the farmers. The mushroom stand is an hour wait. So mushrooms, check. Absolutely. So yeah, and that's good. So in terms of product, then it's good to see those preference states, and it makes sense based on what you talked about, certainly in terms of sour, less bitter and less sweet, more bitter and less sweet. But in terms of product, we mentioned kombucha, I mentioned it earlier. You predicted the emergence of that. What do you see emerging from a product perspective in the near future? Is there anything that kind of ringing your bells?
There is. I have to tread carefully here because I want to make clear that what we're predicting is an opportunity, right? Not something that will happen. It's something that if it happens, there's a high level of preference for. And,
Right.
and that product is makgeolli. Makgeolli is Korean rice beer. There is, sake is, if you think of sake as rice wine, then makgeolli is rice beer. And the good versions of it, the versions in Korea, and we're starting to see a couple of much smaller craft producers here in the United States. It's relatively low alcohol. It's relatively low sweetness. It's made out of rice. It's considered to be as healthy as alcoholic beverage could be. But I think that there's a real opportunity for makgeolli. It has the right level of sourness. It has the right level of earthiness. It's relatively easy to flavor on top of, so there's extension opportunities. And it's a traditional beverage with a long history in Korea.
Interesting. So we should be on the lookout for makgeolli. How do you spell that?
Korean doesn't have a generally accepted anglicization, but most people spell it Makgeolli.
Makgeolli, Macaulay. Okay, interesting. Well, let's check that. We'll have to keep our eye out for that. All right, that's great. Well, I think we've, I don't see any questions. I just wanted to stop and look to see if anybody has queried us. I don't believe they have. So let's just proceed to basically our last slide, our traditional last slide. You know, it's a great line that I love, that data is the secret ingredient to great product and great products. And I think it's a great place that we always use to kind of cap off our discussions, because it goes to the heart about what we're doing and what we're talking about. It goes to the heart of how you see data and how you've put it together to help drive insights and solutions for our clients and the people that you're doing business with, and helping them to achieve their goals so that they're not part of the 75 to 90% failure rate pool that we've talked about earlier. And I think, as you said, great data is the key to understanding and to being able to predict sensory preferences among consumers. And I think that certainly what you've talked about today is all about the usage of data, the obtaining of data that means something and that counts for something. So I think that's great. There is a question that I've seen just pop up, and the question is, which product categories have been fed into the AI?
That's a great question.
Right.
There are two answers to that question. So the areas that we have done the most collection in is anything that's ready to eat or ready to drink. So, you know, coffee, chocolate, beer, scotch, cognac, salty snacks, baked goods, confections, beef jerky, anything really that's CPG, ready to eat, ready to drink. But we do push the boundaries on that quite a bit. We've now done work in frozen food in the United States. We do a ton of work on instant noodles in Southeast Asia. We've done canned soups in Japan. So we can push the boundaries on it a little bit. The thing that the AI is best at is when every bite is homogeneous, right? Every bite tastes the same. So, you know, it works better on a hamburger patty than it would on a whole hamburger, because the combinatoric expansion there for, you know, what patty, what bun, what cheese, what condiments, what pickles, what lettuce, just it makes it much harder for the AI to model and then to optimize. But we have done quite a bit of work on alternative proteins like burger patties and that kind of thing as well. So we can get into some pretty complex matrices. The reason that I say that there's two answers is because we run on a trunk and branch model. So our trunk is all of the data that we've ever collected, our proprietary data set that our company itself has collected. But in addition to that, any data that you collect or any data that we collect on your behalf, so your prototypes, your products, your competitors' products, go into your private branch. So our trunk plus your branch are your predictions. So there's a competitive advantage to having the largest branch. It allows the AI to make the highest resolution predictions for the flavors, aromas, and textures that are relevant to your product. And we have a follow-up question.
Right. Can you talk about how you derive the 24 terms? For those of you who don't know, there are 24 inputs as to the human palate and what it can taste. And were they compared to spectrum terms?
So we did not do a direct side-by-side comparison to sensory spectrum, predominantly because we are doing consumer sensory work. And then we're allowing the AI to actually generalize the consumer sensory work and to correct misidentifications, to correct for use of vocabulary. So we don't train individuals on calibration or standards. We tell them to use the language that comes naturally to them, and then the AI will do the rest. So one way to think about that is under traditional methods, you calibrate your panel so everyone's using the same lexicon. Using AI-driven methods, you calibrate the AI so the AI understands what the sensory terminology means from different individuals. The 24 terms were derived to entirely encompass gustatory flavor space. The idea is that there's nothing in flavor, aroma, and texture that falls outside of the perceptual ability to describe in those 24 terms. On average, anywhere from as low as 8 to as high as 14 are present in a single product. We know obviously we never see all 24.
Right.
And then
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, the third question,
Yeah.
where do we conduct the sensory tests? During COVID, we did a modified form of iHut, but generally we do CLT. We have people come into our standing panels in either New York or Shanghai, or we do demographic and market surveys in various countries across the world where we recruit individuals and bring them into a central panel.
Right. Well, I think that was good. Those were 3 questions from the crowd. It's another one. If they're consumer terms, how can R&D use the data for development? Flavorists do not use these terms.
So in fact, flavorists are generally quite used to working with consumer-based descriptors. If we think about the type of feedback that an R&D group, product marketers, executive teams at CPG companies use in communication with flavor houses and flavorists in development, right? They're generally not using calibrated terms. The majority of individuals who are giving product feedback or product direction, or even attempting to interpret the data, generally aren't using calibration terms. So the first thing is that, you know, as we work with flavorists and product formulators, they're quite used to thinking in terms of these are consumer-based sensory descriptors. But the second thing is the majority of consumer-based sensory work is very noisy, right? If you were using traditional methods, then you would have people calling tangerine orange, orange clementine, clementine grapefruit, right? You'd have just all sorts of cascading misidentifications, and misidentification rates, even for very common flavors, are upwards of 15 to 20%. So what the AI is doing is it's actually taking what individuals think that they perceive, and it's running those through a series of models in order to correct them. So what they're getting, what the formulator is getting is actually a highly not standardized, right, because it's not calibrated, but they're getting high resolution information around the flavor profile that they're targeting. And we have then additional tools that are available to formulators to actually hit that target flavor profile. So for example, if the AI predicts this product needs to be orange flavored, and the flavorist says, well, I have 50 different orange flavors, which one should I use? What we can do is we could actually explode that flavor and then force the AI to communicate the flavor of orange in terms of relevant component parts. And that might be some percentage citric acid, it might be some percentage sweetness, it might be some percentage bitterness. But by doing that, we can actually determine what specific form of orange the AI is asking for and what they're perceiving.
Great.
2 additional questions, examples of the 24 terms. Those are things like fruits, earthy, herbaceous, roasted, nuts and seeds. They're what we call broad spectrum flavor category. And the model itself is the data collection itself is a mixed Thursonian scaling and scaled attribute intensity model with a descriptive analysis component. So for example, someone could say, I taste fruits. I tasted at a 3 out of 5 on intensity. And then within fruits, they'll get a randomized selection of flavors. And they could say, I taste apple, I taste peach, I taste kiwi. They can type in their own, and that's available in 22 languages. Which I think is related to the next question that we got, is how do we approach recruiting panelists outside the United States? Do we look for specific demographics or screen them? We screen on demographics, we don't screen on behavior. So we're looking for Gen Pop. So we will screen on economics, age, sex, race, general income levels, and we'll get a demographically stratified sampling of the target population. And in many places, we do multiple rounds of recruitment. So for example, in Russia, we did Moscow and St. Petersburg. In Vietnam, we did Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, and central Vietnam separately from those 3. So we have 3 different demographic regions. Italy, we did Rome and Milan. United States being our home market, right? We can do Asian American, African American, Hispanic American, and Anglo-Saxon, and any of the primary geographic splits with separate models for California and Texas. So we do take quite a nuanced view, and the sensory system is always translated into the local language. So as I said, the sensory system is available in 22 languages right now.
Great.
Oh, that was a great set of questions.
Great questions. If you have any other questions and you wish to, instead of expressing them here, you can always contact us and write us with questions as well. So feel free to access Jason and Gastrograph in general whenever you wish. You can remain anonymous. You can attach your name to it, whatever you feel most comfortable with. We're interested in talking with you and discussing with you, and giving you the answers as best we can, as Jason just described his answers to those questions. So please stay in contact. Anyway, it was really great talking with you, Jason. These are obviously hot button issues. They're important. I would ask people out there to reach out to us and describe any of the issues they wish us to tackle in the future. We have a monthly discussion set up. We want to talk about some of the stuff that's most important to everyone. So please reach out and let us know. And we'll be sure to answer them or even make a full-fledged attempt at creating a full discussion around it. So thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks for your time, Jason. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Gerry.
All right. Bye-bye.